A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome once again to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again. And so, some might have wondered, with all the Illumination stuff, all the Disney stuff, all the Pixar stuff and whatnot, some might wonder why I haven't bothered talking anything about Universal, especially because some long-term subscribers of mine have actually mentioned that I did in fact at one point talk about certain Universal franchises like E.T., Jurassic Park, and some others here and there. So, you know what? Why don't I go on ahead and fix that? Because through this week, I don't expect that much to happen. There was a new movie that just came out, known as Absolution. Maybe I'll leave behind a review on that one. But I don't really plan on doing any more of those, because they've sort of been a hassle. But for the most part, that's mostly because Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again is going to eventually come to a close again. Before I do that though, why don't I go ahead and talk about a Universal film. In this instance, what we're going to do here is 1982's E.T., the Extraterrestrial. This was one of the big pieces that Steven Spielberg put together, and apart from other big successes in life, like Duel and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T. was indefinitely one of Spielberg's most memorable and phenomenal masterpieces. For the year 1982, this was at a point when there was still some pioneering bits about the film industry, but some could even argue that the 1980s was the peak of Hollywood. And to some agreements, and maybe even a few disagreements, there are tons of masterpieces that came out throughout the whole decade. Apart from E.T., there were other big films like Back to the Future, Ferris Bueller, and even Tim Burton's Batman. But with E.T., this was before a majority of them. In any which case, this is the story of a boy who manages to find a certain friend out in the woods. This friend was unlike anybody he had ever seen before. At that point in time, this was about 3 decades at a point when phenomenon circulating aliens on Earth, invaders from Mars, and many of the other well-known urban legends, folklore and whatnot, especially given the fact that there was the infamous Roswell case in 1947. But being 35 years in the future, not that many people would have expected aliens to still be cool. But then again, look at what Ridley Scott gave us just 3 years prior, and eventually following up with a sequel in '86. I had revisited those films though, so I don't need to dwell on those anymore. And, well, I've gone on pretty far with all this stuff. The plot of E.T. revolves around a young boy whom used to go to school in California, and he basically lives overlooking a certain city. This life of his, however, would basically take a bit of a turn to these somewhat stranger things going on. Because he and his family, while they might not be the bestest of people living in that one house, it becomes clear that eventually E.T. would change Elliot's life forever. Because at first, Elliot was a bit scared about the whole notion. Having gone into the woods at certain points, especially during the nightfall, and eventually coming across certain strange things that happen, even at his own house. And well, some investigations, not only from him, but from other people that he has seen out there in those same woods, and also riding on his bike, passing along Reese's Pieces in order to attract this certain somebody. Well, it all boils down to, who could it really be? Spielberg was certainly able to really lighten up the suspense factor, and especially given the opening scene that we saw where E.T. was running away from the government, It's that certain conspiracy where they believe that the alien is here to kill everybody and whatnot, By the 80s, it was still relevant. And who knows? Some people do believe today they can actually be a friend from afar. But I'd much rather not go into any of that conspiracy stuff or any of that belief stuff. That is, until we get concrete evidence of their existence. Anyways, though, When Elliot and E.T. actually do meet up with each other, it becomes clear that E.T. could become a bit of a problem for his family. At first, Elliot tries to hide him in his room, mainly in his closet amongst his toy collection and whatnot. But there eventually comes a point in time where his older brother gets home after some NFL practice, and basically Elliot decides to let him in on a certain secret he's kept, hoping that he wouldn't tell anybody about it. And well, E.T.'s brought into the room, his brother turns around, and boom, the evidence is right in front of him. An alien from the stars has come to Earth hoping to phone home. At least according to his own words, E.T. phoned home. It eventually came to a point when Elliot realized that all E.T. wants to do is to call his friends on his own home planet. And when they do devise of a plan in order to create a contraption, using some parts and some TLC to create an interstellar communication device, while it is makeshift quality, it still does in fact manage to hold up. And to think that after some trial and error had gone down, after some advantages and disadvantages, and E.T. struggling to fit in with Elliot's family, I mean, it's not just with his older brother and sister, but there eventually comes a point when his parents find out about E.T. and all the trouble that the family has had to go through thus far to ensure that E.T. could get back home safe and far away from the government's clutches. Because who knows what they want to do with him? Experiment on him? Feed him to a lion? Who really knows? But of course, even when Elliot does manage to get the thing up and running, a successful call was sent out to E.T.'s homeworld, and E.T. himself is more than proud of all these things. He's enjoying his Reese's Pieces. He's enjoying his time spending with his new friends at that house, and even goes out trick-or-treating with the bunch. So, who would have thought? Imagine having an alien as a friend and disguising him, which actually is pretty clever by the writer's perspective, especially by Spielberg's perspective, because it not only helps so that E.T. cannot be spotted out there on the streets, but being covered in clown shoes and a giant cloth over him, it does work so well. It's a perfect disguise. Anyways, though, it isn't long before, believe it or not, E.T. ends up turning up sick. And when E.T. does become too weak to move, which was actually the result of him using some of his own energy, the touch of his finger was able to heal Elliot from a certain blade wound on his finger. It stops the bleeding completely and heals up the cut immediately. But the good times supposedly have to come to an end at some point, as the government eventually does close in on Elliot's home. They surround the building, create a quarantine perimeter, and doctors, soldiers, all kinds of specialists from the government converge in the house itself, and they basically have both E.T. and Elliot stripped and tested vigorously. It almost comes to a certain point where we actually do get to see a certain connection between the two. I mean, Elliot's sounding rather sickly, and E.T. is basically the same thing. It must have something to do with this connection that happens between them. This kind of bond that transitions from an emotional perspective into feelings of either being sick or dying. And being that they both sound similar when they respond to the agent's questions, well, at least we do get to hear some praise from one agent in particular that talks to Elliot, because that device he set up in the woods to contact E.T.'s homeworld was in fact a brilliant idea to do. To have E.T. be sent back home, that at least was the best he could have done. However, it does only take a turn from the worst from here on out, because what happens is that E.T. goes critical likely due to him getting even weaker and possibly dying as a result. Elliot becomes rather frustrated with this and demands to have E.T. respond to him, but it seems like there's nothing they can do about it. Sometime later, though, after some moments of silence go through, we do eventually get a sign of hope that E.T. just might make it after all. Because believe it or not, there's a certain signal that's coming from him. Meaning, his friends from space are coming to get him. And Elliot gets so excited, he actually gets along with his brother. His brother bumps his head on the ceiling, and eventually they do organize an escape, which they manage to do so. They get a hold of their closest friends, gear themselves up, and go out on their bikes alongside one of the vans that they take from the quarantined area. Not only to transport E.T., but to also have him be set up. So that way, they can make it out of there and over to the precise area in which that the ship is supposed to land. When they do so, they all start biking down with E.T. wrapped around a blanket to hide him from the cops. And not only that, but there's more trouble behind them. You got police and government agents everywhere trying to close in on E.T. and capture him again after they escaped. But yet, even when it seems like hope is lost and they'll eventually be caught, E.T. has a certain power. The power of friendship becomes so strong that the bikes just start flying into the air. And this is, without a doubt, one of the most iconic pieces in movie history. So much so that Amblin Entertainment literally uses the famous scene of Elliot, E.T., and the flying bike passing over the moon as their own company logo. No wonder, because Amblin was partially responsible for production alongside Universal and the many things about Steven Spielberg himself. So, way to go, Amblin, for continuing to keep E.T. alive. And well, E.T. finally makes it back to his ship. And even though the agents and whatnot catch up to them, it eventually becomes clear to them that they must stand down. Because all E.T. wanted to do was leave Earth and head back with his own kind to his own planet. But of course, it's not quite over. Even though E.T. blatantly gives off a farewell with his famous line, "I'll be right here," it's certainly not over yet. The movie basically ends off on a high note. However, it becomes more than just a simple movie by Steven Spielberg. It becomes such a big success throughout the entirety of the 1980s that when Universal Orlando opened up in 1990, they included their own E.T. ride as one of the first opening day attractions. And the fact is that 34 years have passed since it opened in June 1990, and it's still here, believe it or not. And the fact is that I rode on that attraction twice, as you can see from a few photos I took of the attraction itself. And while it's a little too dark for me to take pictures or videos of the ride itself while we're on it in a POV perspective or whatnot, I can at least tell you that the ride did give us some insight on what a potential sequel could have been like. It could have picked up where we left off with E.T. leaving Earth with his friends, and the fact is that the whole ride is set up almost like that of a certain mission, where us riders have to rescue E.T., get him off Earth, and he will take us all the way to his home planet, in which we are graced with loads of amazing stuff. Animatronics, flying colors, unique scenery that is just so amazing to stare at. I mean, you just can't get enough of all those glowing bits, waterfalls, and dancing aliens, much like E.T. himself. Of course, E.T. himself does make an appearance at the very end of the ride, in which he thanks us, and probably the best part about the ride is that he actually says our name That's right. That's because the reason is that park employees who operate the attraction give us a thing known as an interplanetary passport, as explained by the introductory video that we see in a pre-queue room in which doors close behind us while more in the front of us will open up, but only after this video is played. It explains to us from Steven Spielberg himself that E.T. needs to get back home, and us riders need to help him get there. We don't have to pedal the bikes that we're riding on. However, an interplanetary passport, which is basically a card that they hand to us before the ride starts, and we drop off when the ride ends, well, it sure is a unique thing that they put together. The fact is that they have us state our first name, the card prints out, and they scan it up there, so that way it loads onto a pre-queued audio sequencer from E.T.'s own speaker, so that way, when we approach him, he congratulates us and says all of our names. So, that alone is an impressive, innovative piece of technology. The fact is, 34 years later, it still holds up so well. It's amazing that Universal has kept that ride around for all these years since it opened in 1990. But even more so, it's just a good idea that there could have been a lot more mileage that E.T. could have gotten. He could have gotten a series after the movie came out. He could have gotten video games, even though he technically did on a few different occasions. And probably even more merchandise could have been made possible. You got toys, you got clothes, you got stickers, you got pins, you got posters, a lot of things that you can work with. I mean, it's insane. And the fact is that there was a famous Fred Willard episode in which there was literally an E.T. addict who had everything since the movie came out. Not just the movie itself on VHS, DVD, or whatnot, but every possible bit of merchandise you could have gotten your hands on, including exclusive bits from parks. So, talk about a movie that pertains such significance that it makes one man totally addicted to it. According to Fred Willard, that is. So, you know what? With all that said and done, this really is an amazing movie that I'm glad that I'm having myself a good opportunity to talk about again. After all these years have come by, I still look at this movie with such insanely good insight. And with that in mind, I will go ahead and give this a nice big scoring here. 9.4 out of 10.1. I feel like that's only fair, and it's only worth it that this movie gets such a big scoring because it was made so well, and because of the merchandise that it generated over the years. Even to this very day, 42 years later, a lot of us are still going to watch this movie over and over and over again. And now, I feel like that might be it. What I might do is go ahead and see Absolution and then leave behind a review for it. But after that point, I probably won't do any more of these things regarding new movies, because I've done so many of them over the past 6 months or so. And well, if you want to see more, go down on my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.
I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.